Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Thanks for being here tonight. What you heard from Adam is that my name is Stosh and my last name is Walsh, and those two don't go together very well. So I get to be like Bono and Pele and Cher and other people who only have one name, and I just get to go by Stosh. So that's the deal, and there you go. You can clap for that if you like. I said Cher earlier today when the students were in the room, and I was a little afraid they didn't know who she was. I felt like I was old. And I thought to myself, wow, some of these kids were born like 1997. This is really not an okay thing. So I think a lot about leadership. I write a lot about leadership. I practice it a lot. And one of the things that I want to think about with you tonight is how you can claim your own leadership and what you need to do about it. And so I'm making a couple of assumptions about leadership and about all the people in this room. And so I want to share those before we get started with anything else. So the first assumption that I'm making this evening about leadership is that every single person in this room has the capacity to lead. Every single person in this room has the capacity to lead. It doesn't matter who you are. It doesn't matter what you've done in the past. It doesn't matter what your plans are for the future. You have the capacity to lead. And the reason why is because leadership is based on the roles that you have, the circles that you move in. So you are a pastor, a teacher, a coach, a manager, a consultant, a friend, you're involved in a book club. Whatever that role is, you have the capacity to lead within it. So that's the first assumption. The other thing about that, though, is that you're the only something that someone else will ever have. Most of you probably only had one fifth-grade teacher. Most of you probably only have one parent, father, mother, right? Brother, sister, best friend. There's an exclusivity to that. And because there's an exclusivity to that, it creates urgency. It creates importance. And so as you think about the roles that you have and the ways in which you can demonstrate leadership, one of the things that you can be thinking about is that people are expecting that of you because you might very well be the only person who can provide it in that particular role. The other thing I want you to think about is that all of those roles lend you the capacity for influence. And leadership is more or less summarized by whether or not you have influence with other people. And so as you consider those roles and as you think about those roles, I want to tell you about the second assumption. The second assumption that I'm making is that every single person in this room and everybody you passed on the street today and everybody you have ever known is at some point going to die. Now, that might sound like a really morbid assumption, and you might be thinking to yourself, okay, Stosh, so where are you going with this? Here's the thing. The fact that we're all going to die gives rise to any number of our behaviors. And it gives rise to some of the things that we think about and we do and we spend our time on often. Things like bucket lists. So how many of you have thought at some point in your life, before I die, I want to fill in the blank? Most of the hands in the room, right? You want to go see the Great Wall of China. Or you want to write a book. Or you want to accomplish something. And it gives us drive. And it gives us ambition. And it gives us motivation. And it gives us purpose. And those are all good things. But here's the thing. When we think about dying, most of the time, we think about our own death. Unless death is actually imminent for someone, when we think about the fact that we're all mortal and that one day we're all going to pass away, we think about our own death. Ironically, when we think about leadership, we mostly ascribe leadership and leadership characteristics to other people. So when we think about leadership, we think of somebody else's domain, and when we think about dying, we think, well, that's going to be me someday. And so what I want to share with you tonight, what I want to challenge you to think about, the idea that I want to give you, is what would look like if we put those two things together. What if we combined the notion that we're all going to die with the fact that all of us are leaders or have the capacity to lead? So instead of thinking, let's live like we're all going to die at some point and have that motivate our behavior, what if we led like everyone else is? What if we turned that on its head And instead of pursuing the ambitious things in our world, we thought, well, if everyone else is going to pass away, and they very well could do that tomorrow, how do I need to interact with them? In what ways could I inspire them? In what ways can I show them or teach them or help them that I maybe wouldn't have in the past if I hadn't had that perspective or I hadn't shared that experience? So that's what I'd like to challenge you to think about with me tonight. I'm a product of this, and that's why I'm an exponent of it. You see, I'm a product of this because when I was 5 years old, my father committed suicide. And at that point in my life, my mom was 24 years old, and I was the oldest of her 3 kids. And at that point, my maternal grandfather stepped in and stayed in ways that have impacted my life beyond measurement. And so because of that, I recognized there was the literal moment where my life was probably in danger of taking a path that maybe it wouldn't have had it not been for his intervention. I could tell you story after story of him and of other people mentoring and being alongside and basically leading me like it was urgent, like there was something happening, like I was going to die. When I was in 4th grade, I had a teacher who called me up to her desk after the rest of the class had been dismissed, and she looked at me and she said, "You're bored, aren't you?" And I remember thinking very vividly, is that a trick question? Fortunately, it wasn't, and she answered it for me. She said, "I think you're bored. And so here's what I want to do." And what she basically proposed to me was independent study as a 10-year-old. Now, I just told you the background I came from, and so you might imagine that that had a pretty substantial impact on me. I came from a single-parent home. I had no idea that there was a world out there where you could study and read and write and be rewarded for it. No idea. And so I was the first person in my family to graduate from college, and the only person in my family has a graduate degree. And it's because of interventions like those that I was able to do that. It's not because of my own ambition. It's not because I've realized some potential. It's because people invested in ways that were urgent. So I want you to think for a second. If you were to take that challenge and you could boil it down to 2 or 3 sentences, what would that look like for you? If you led everyone else like they were dying, what would you be bringing to the table? What would you have on offer for other people? And as you think about that for a second, I'll tell you what it is for me. If I lead other people like they're dying, I'm lending them courage. I'm loving people that I know and loving people that I don't know so much and so well that they're not afraid anymore. And I'm trying to be a sending influence in their lives so that they can go and do and be something that they might not have been without their association with me. And I think, actually I'm convinced, that every single one of you has the capacity to do something unique in the lives of other people intentionally that would make that difference for them. But I think it requires that intentionality. I think it requires that purpose. I think it requires that perspective in order to lend that urgency, in order to make that happen. And that's what I want to invite you into. I also want to expand this for us a little bit. And I want us to think about what would this look like if we thought about it in roles that are not as familiar, not as comfortable, or not with people we already know. What would it look like if we thought about leading other people like they were dying in our role as a consumer? How many of you have been to the grocery store in the last week? Just about everybody. How many of you go to the same grocery store most of the time? Just about everybody. How many of you see people at that grocery store whose faces you recognize but whose names you don't know? Same group, right? What would it look like if you embraced the fact that you have the capacity to lead and you treated those people as though they were dying? What kind of a community would you create around you to start with, and then into your broader community and into your broader world? What could that look like? What about driving? I think we might be able to single-handedly we might be able to single-handedly cure the world of road rage with this concept. If I pull up to the four-way stop at the same time as someone else and I'm leading like they're dying, they go first and I'm not bent out of shape about the 10 seconds I lost, right? It might also mean that the next time someone cuts me off, I'm a little less disappointed in humanity, let's say. Right? So I want to invite you into a larger picture of what leadership could mean for you. I don't want you to think about leadership as something that someone else does because of the position that they have in a company. I want you to think about leadership as something you do because of the roles that you have and the relationships that you have in other people's lives. And I want you to lead those people like they're dying. So let's start right now. You all have a cell phone with you more than likely. Go ahead, pull out your cell phone and open up your contact list. You've got a contacts list right there. So as you're thumbing through your contacts list, I want you to stop at the first name that just starts to ring bells for you. The first name that kind of tugs at you. And just stop at that name. And we're going to create a little plan right now. So you've got that name, and what I want you to think about next is, what's the impact you want to have on that particular individual? If you could go out of your way and purposefully move them in a direction, if you could make a difference to that particular individual, what would you want it to be? Would you want it to be encouragement? Would you want to mentor that person? Would you want to tell them that they have more potential than they think? What would you do to create that impact? What's the impact you want to have with that individual? And land on that. Some of you might be writing this down or making a note in your phone. Do that. You'll be much more accountable to it if you do. And then the last thing is, okay, so what's the action that you're going to take in order to start having that impact? It's not a one-time only thing. It's an ongoing investment in that relationship. And so the first thing you might do is send an email. Hey, can we have coffee soon? You might send a handwritten note, just giving that person encouragement. You might just tell them face to face, here are some of the things that I really think are positive about you. And that's the beginning of that walking alongside and doing something that only you can do, and accepting that leadership and creating that urgency is going to make a difference in someone else's life. And the last thing I want you to think about is, what's the timetable for you? So is that something that you're willing to do tonight on the drive home? Tomorrow before work? Sometime in the next week? Put a stop date on it. Give yourself that built-in accountability. So you've got an individual, a way in which you want to impact them. What's the first step you're going to take, and by when? So I've got a few minutes left, and I want to practice that right now, because as I think about this event and as I think about the experience that we've all had together over the course of yesterday and today, there are a whole bunch of people who, if I'm going to lead like they're dying, I absolutely need to say this from the front. So anyone who's been involved with putting this event on, from the folks in the back of the booth, Adam, the rest of the guys who are backstage, I want you to stand up and be recognized. And if you're backstage, I want you to walk out onto stage, because I want all of these people right here to clap for them like you have never clapped before. All right? All right. And while you're doing that, make sure you look backwards because we've got a whole bunch of folks back there who've helped that happen. And so let's do it again. Folks, you've been terrific. Thank you for your hospitality. Thank you for your attention. Thank you for leading them like they're dying.